All right. Hello, everyone. Hello and welcome to Lily's Show and Tell series. Lily stands for Lifelong Information Literacy, and we're a group of librarians and information professionals who work to promote lifelong information literacy. Before we begin, I have a couple of housekeeping items. The session is being recorded, and the recording will be available on the Lily Show and Tell webpage by the end of the week. Feel free to put your questions in the chat. I'll keep an eye on the chat and note down any questions for our speaker. We'll get to those at the end. Finally, if you want to learn more about Lily or presenting your own show and tell event, I'm going to put my email address in my Zoom name and also in the chat. So if you feel free to email me at any time. And now on to our speaker, Leslie Ross.
Hi, everybody. I hope you all can hear me okay. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, get my presentation up. All right, so hopefully everybody can see that. Okay, I was just gonna admit someone there. Well, I want to say good morning because it's 11 o'clock where I am, but I will also say good afternoon to those of you in Central and Eastern time. So welcome to my presentation. I'm going to loosely say entitled Information Literacy Instruction, Creating Inclusive and Engaging Communities of Learning for All Students. So this is really more of a discussion, or I'm just going to tell you a little bit about my experience with information literacy and using some of these principles. It's more anecdote and less research on my part, but I will be consulting other research. So by way of introduction, again, my name is Leslie Ross. I am currently the instruction coordinator at New Mexico State University, and I have been in this position for 4 whole months. So I am a newbie, and I have relocated to Las Cruces, New Mexico from Davenport, Iowa. So 2 guesses as to which state I was in when I took that selfie. So just a little bit about my experience with information literacy. I am as I said, the instruction coordinator here at NMSU. But I have lots of experience teaching information literacy beyond NMSU. So I worked for 15 plus years at a small liberal arts college in Davenport, Iowa. We did have a required IL 101 course, so Information Literacy 101. It was a gen ed requirement. All students had to take it before they graduated. Unless they tested out or took it at another college. So I saw students, mostly freshmen and sophomore, but I saw students from across the academy in terms of level. So at NMSU, where I am now, I coordinate the instruction program, and we do have credit-bearing courses. We have a 100 level, sort of the ins and outs of the research process, and we have a 300 level information literacy course. Both are electives, so they're gen ed electives. So it's a little bit of difference. But then we, of course, also give information literacy instruction, as you all do, in one-shots, online modules, one-on-one consultations, and ref desk work. So something that I'm very proud of to be affiliated with NMSU is we are an official Hispanic serving and minority serving institution. So UDL, Universal Design for Learning, plus inclusive pedagogies equals love. And I very much wanted to make this the title of my presentation, but I am so prone to those long academic titles. I just couldn't do it. So let's look at this as my subtitle. So I'll talk about my experience today, and most of this will be drawn from my classroom experience. But I'm also very interested in continuing education, if you will, my education, continuing my study of inclusive pedagogies and their applications in the information literacy classroom in my current position. So at this point in the semester, I have not been in the classroom, but I have built a 300 level online asynchronous course via Canvas module, which for me was really challenging, or more challenging in terms of design than a face-to-face class. So a face-to-face class, one of the things I love is if something is awry, or you can tell something's not working with a student or a group of students, you can pivot on the spot. So when putting together an asynchronous online course, many of you probably have this experience as well, you have to try to anticipate those moments. A certain group of students might not understand this. What can I do to build in that pivot into the space? So why this topic, why this presentation? This all started in 2017, and I started teaching in 2005. So I had been teaching for a long time at that point. So in 2017, I was on an ACRL committee, and I loved it. It was really fun. And we were tasked with coming up with 5 sources on asset-based pedagogy. It was the first time I'd heard of it. And we were reviewing these items for the ACRL's 5 Things to Read web publication, which is one of my favorite publications. So it's a great publication. So as I was researching those sources, I found that my eyes were really opened by what I was reading. I had been having trouble in the classroom. There were barriers there to student learning, and there were barriers to my being able to form relationships with these students. And I didn't know why. But diving deep into these resources on asset-based and other inclusive pedagogies, which are basically student-centered approaches with a focus or deference paid to student background, learning styles, and individual abilities of learners, and then couple that with universal design for learning, revolutionized my way of looking at my course from a new perspective, lots of new perspectives, design perspective as well as relationship perspectives. So why IL? These principles that I'm talking about today are out there independent of information literacy. And I wanted to tell you a little bit why I thought that information literacy is a really good vehicle, a really good context to apply these learner-centered, student-centered, positive approaches. And I have 2 reasons that I think that that's true here. There are certainly many more. I just need to move the gallery here so I can read my slide, okay? So when information literacy first hit the scene, or it was first coined, we were talking about library instruction in terms of finding, using, and evaluating information. And I don't know how many credit-bearing courses or one-shot workshops or any of that stuff, how much that was happening in the very, very beginning. But it evolved. Library instruction has evolved. And the definition has evolved as well. So in 2016, when the ACRL board filed the new framework for information literacy, we went from conceptualizing information literacy as finding, using, and evaluating information to the new definition, the set of integrated abilities encompassing the reflective discovery of information, the understanding of how information is produced and valued, and the use of information in creating new knowledge and participating ethically in communities of learning. So essentially, within that expanded definition, we do see finding, using, and evaluating information. But we see so much more. So we're like looking under the hood. I like to think of this as I use that image, that stock image all the time. I love the idea of looking under the hood of different concepts and different things. So we're looking under the hood and we're seeing that finding, using, and evaluating information, at least the way that we are teaching it now, includes reflective discovery and understanding, and producing, valuing, and using information, and creating new knowledge, and ethical participation. So all of these things, all of these words that I just read off are very personal. These are intrinsic abilities. And since we are already teaching these very personal intrinsic abilities, not only is it important that we're able to teach them, but it's important that students have these abilities to understand everything, not just college, but information in general. To me, it was really important to tweak my course and the way that I teach my course, and I'm just talking about me, to teach to that individual. So my number 2 reason here, which I should probably have led with, is information literacy. What we're teaching, what we're doing, and I know everybody says this about their profession, but this is very important, what we're doing here. And we're not just teaching in the classroom either. I get kind of caught in that because that's where I'm pulling most of my experience. But we're teaching in a service arena as well. So I can get by, I can be a good librarian without knowing how to write like a professional journalist, right? I don't need to know that to do my job. But a professional journalist needs to know that authority is constructed and contextual to be able to do their job to the best of their ability. So all of these threshold concepts: authority is constructed and contextual, information creation is a process, information is value, research is inquiry, scholarship is conversation, searching is strategic exploration, are all foundational to learning. And we are in the position to help our students not only learn, what we're teaching, but to create a strong foundation for the rest of their knowledge attainment and the rest of, getting through their major and being the best person that they can be. So, students and learners, I'm thinking with this slide of the students that came through my classroom. And I did have a lot of students going through my classroom over the years. And in the description of my session, I said that I was going to be talking about helping remove barriers for students with disabilities. And that is really true. But as you will see, I'm not going to stop there. I think it's important to remove barriers for all students. So when I had classes, when I had students in front of me in the classroom in the past, and when I will have students in front of me in the classroom in the future, when I have students at the desk, when I'm in a one-shot in a faculty classroom, I guarantee that I'm going to have students in there with diagnosed disabilities, including learning disabilities, with undiagnosed disabilities, including learning disabilities, with diagnosed disabilities, including learning disabilities, who don't feel comfortable self-identifying. So we do have those students in the academy, and there are, if I weren't a librarian, I would probably work at like an accessibilities resource center, or services for students with disabilities, because the work they do is so important. And students with disabilities absolutely attain much with the support of those offices. So they're great. And when, at least at the institution I was at, and again, this was a couple of years ago, so things may have changed, the students who were able to get accommodations through this office had to be diagnosed with disabilities, or undiagnosed, they could get like temporary accommodations, but then that was pending a trip to see a healthcare professional and get a diagnosis. So those were the students who got these official accommodations. And accommodations are great, but, and that but is related only to my classroom, again, not to the idea of accommodations or to those offices for students with disabilities that are doing such great work. So in my classroom, accommodations were great, but students need diagnoses to get those. Some students are able to do that, and some students are not. Maybe they don't have access to healthcare at all. Maybe they don't have health insurance. Maybe they don't have like a support person who recommended that or took them, you know, to see somebody when they were younger. Maybe they don't want a diagnosis. Maybe they don't want to go see a healthcare professional. But for whatever reason, those students that don't have diagnoses don't get these official accommodations. Students need to self-report to accessibility services, which is one thing, but individual professors as well. And we may have been a little backward. I imagine they are doing this electronically now. But when I was in the classroom, students actually brought in a physical piece of paper. It was a color. I don't remember. I think it was pink. So everybody knew that they were coming up to the professor and handing the professor an accommodation sheet. Issues may be short-lived, like maybe the student is struggling with something. Maybe they broke their leg, or maybe they broke up with somebody and are feeling that, or, you know, just something that is they're not going to need accommodations long enough to go through the process to get that, or maybe they wouldn't qualify. And then accommodations don't always fit student needs. So I saw this a lot, where a student in high school, and in particular with the accommodation of extending a deadline for assignments. So a student in high school with a 504 plan or an IEP may have had the accommodation of being able to turn work in after the stated deadline with no penalty. But at least at our university, that was not an accommodation that that students could get through the office. I agree with that. I mean, I get it. And I'm, you know, a big believer in academic freedom, and that does need to be something that the professor of the class would do, you know, because they know the assignment, they know the student in that. But at the time I was there, the institutional zeitgeist at my institution was that faculty didn't feel like they should extend deadlines, that it was their job, and this wasn't everybody, it wasn't me, but in general, that one of their jobs is to teach students to be able to make deadlines or something like that. So we very much had that culture where I was. And, you know, obviously that for a student maybe who has a disability wherein they have executive functioning issues, maybe have a deficit there. It's not a behavioral issue, it's like a deficit. And that that kind of zeitgeist sets those kinds of students up for failure. So another thing that I noticed in my classroom is that many other students could benefit from the same accommodations, but weren't eligible. And when you think of it in those terms too, you have somebody from like another group or just an individual that could really benefit from, you know, a particular accommodation, but they can't because they don't have a disability. I mean, it actually does get kind of a little bit ethically murky, like it can feel unfair to certain groups of students. And then lastly, and this is just, it's hard to keep track of. So there were semesters when I had overloads, when we were short-staffed, and I would have 5 classes, 5 sections of information literacy, 20 to 24 students per class, and had to keep track of accommodations, maybe 2 students from each section or 3 students from each section had these accommodations. And it caused a lot of anxiety for me because I didn't want to accidentally not provide a student with an accommodation that they needed. So all of that caused anxiety, and it sort of made my class not run the way that I was hoping that it would. So what I decided to do was look at those accommodations, because most of the students had the same accommodations. They could have more time taking tests. And I'm going to talk more about what I did later in my class, but I will say that I didn't have any like real exams, like in-class exams. That was how I handled that particular one. So that was a way to sort of remove that particular barrier for those students who, you know, needed more time taking tests or needed to take the test in another room. Like the tests I would have would be qualitatively different and online. And, you know, I felt like I could do that with the subject matter I was teaching. Other disciplines, they may not be able to do that. So, and I took some of those other accommodations and I just applied those to the whole class. So I no longer had to worry about shuffling the pieces of paper. Nobody had to worry about, like, I didn't have to worry about this student really needs this help, but, you know, there's like this slippery slope thing. I can't single this person out for this help if somebody else needs it, and you know how that goes. So I just tore down as many barriers as I could for everybody. And what I found when I did that these folks here with diagnosed disabilities, undiagnosed, and diagnosed but didn't want to tell anybody, benefited greatly from that. And so did groups like first generation students. I was a first generation student. I remember absolutely, like, I was in tears over this course that I needed to just drop. It was just one of those courses that I was in the beginning of it. I needed to drop and pick up a different one, but I didn't know that. So, so first generation students very often don't have somebody at home that can tell them, hey, drop the class or something like that. So they're navigating this world. They're the first ones navigating that world in their family. International students, I have personal experience with this one too. I studied abroad in France and I had to learn a new culture. I had to, well, I knew the language, not well. I wasn't fluent when I first got there. So it took me 2 or 3 times longer to do all of my coursework because I had to translate everything into English in my head and then translate that English in my head back out to French. So I came in, first generation students, international students come in already with issues and barriers. We have students who are mentally ill. We have students with substance use disorders, either emerging from the college life or longstanding, or families that are mired down in substance use disorder. We have neurodivergent students beyond the typical disabilities. We have folks who learn better individually, folks who learn better collectively. We have students who are homesick. They're just not able to perform to their best, like maybe right when that particular assignment is due. We have students with emergencies. I have so many stories about emergencies. We have students caring for family members. I've had students bring children, their children, into the classroom. So again, our students are out there living life, and they already have barriers to their education, and they've already defied those barriers and broken through them to land in our classroom. And I would like to remove, I don't want to add to that as much as possible. So as you can see, I've got these groups, and there are folks who I think if any classroom, if you layer in how like interconnected all of these are, and intersectionality, every single person in your classroom is coming in already having to break through a barrier, at least one. So why let anybody in my classroom have to plow through something that they don't have to? So, leveling the playing field. So, as I have talked about, found it necessary to try to level the playing field, or to remove as many barriers as I possibly could. And how do we do that? So I found that universal design for learning was something that spoke to me. So I pulled this information from an article, and I think we're going to be exploring this article for a couple of slides, if I remember correctly. So this is universal design for applying universal design to information literacy, teaching students who learn differently at Landmark College. So I pulled out a little bit of historical information. I'm sure, just in case you need a little refresher. The idea of universal design and that phrase was coined in the 1970s, and it was an effort to make built environments. And I actually really like this quote, but I have to move my gallery here so I can read it. Screen. Effort to make built environments usable by all people to the greatest extent possible without the need for adaptation or specialized design. So UDL, Universal Design for Learning, is basically applying that same principle to curricula. And in my case, to information literacy curricula, to make that curricula or curriculum usable by all people, by all students, to the greatest extent possible without the need for adaptation or specialized design. Now, there will still be occasional, student who will need an adaptation, and that's fine. So Landmark College, which is the case in this particular article that they looked at, they did create a best practices for library instruction, which incorporated universal design for learning principles. And they were conceptualized to work optimally for all students. So this is like right up my alley, right? This was the conclusion that I came to as well. So their list of principles that they created to support not only universal design for learning, but universal design for information literacy. So they're applying this to information literacy. Their 9 principles were based on these 3 principles of universal design. So multiple means of representation, multiple means of action and expression, multiple means of engagement. So the UDL lens is to access, engage, and express. I added this little purple one. So I put my initials there, but I should have put LMRDL. But I also think multiple means of assessment, and I don't know that necessarily fits their 3 principles, but it fits for me. So motivating learners by removing barriers to engagement. So again, I'm going to talk a little bit more in a future slide, but that is one of the changes that I made. Has to do with assessment and grading policies in my classroom. These are the 9 principles. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide, but I did want to give you an example of how the Landmark College used these universal design principles and what that UDIL, or Universal Design for Information Literacy, application might look like, to give you a couple of examples. So I'm going to go through these, and I'm just going to go through the principles that that I have used in my design of my course. And if you wanted to dig into the other ones, I do have citations for all of my sources on the bottom of the slide. So please feel free to go check that out. So the equitable use UDI principle, the UDIL application for that is to, like, you could create web-based course guides. That's what that might look like. Or you could use a sans serif font, right? So ways to remove barriers to access, to use. Flexibility in use. In IL, that might look like using active learning methods that engage multiple senses and using multiple learning methods. Simple and intuitive instruction, that might look like using student-chosen topics or teaching only skills directly related to completing the assignment. Eliminating library lingo and library-centered concepts. I know we've been trying to do that for years. That's hard. I find that really hard to do, but yeah, that's really, but that's a barrier, right? That presents a barrier when we use library lingo to some students, not to all. So why not shoot for those students that provides a barrier for? Perceptible information. That would be like stressing usability features in databases and websites, presenting information in multiple formats. Tolerance for error may be my favorite, although in this article, the UDIL application that they give, I think personally is more suited to elementary and secondary education. So they say allocate 1/3 to 1/2 of each class for assisted individual work time. I mean, that would work on the college level. That probably isn't something that I would do, but what I read when I see tolerance for error is what that would have me do in terms of applying to my information literacy course is I would select assignments that were more reflective. Not all the assignments, but some assignments. So maybe I would show the students how to find a resource, the steps to find a resource in a database. And I would make sure that they knew how to do that. And the assignment would be write a reflection of the process. Tell me, the steps that you took and, what your thoughts were. For me, that is lowering the tolerance for error, because I'm asking them to give me their experience. And then that way I'm seeing where they're coming from, right? I'm meeting them where they are. And I'm potentially learning something that's going to make me a better instructor. It's win-win, right? So low physical effort doesn't apply, size and space doesn't apply to what I have done to redesign my course. A community of learners, I have definitely I encourage students to work together and maybe lead the conversation together. And I will stand back and watch that. And instructional climate. So what they say is work with faculty to have a specific goal. For me, what that might look like is not just saying, come to my office hour if you need me, but maybe, depending upon the class, I have a mandatory meeting with each student just to like introduce myself and to make it easier for the next time. So this universal design definitely fits very nicely into at least the way that I teach information literacy. So I wanted to take, before I go to the next slide, I just wanted to take a moment to give you just a little bit more context and more information about the choices that I made using universal design to change my class and remove barriers. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is my late work policy. And we'll get that over with, because that's the one that stuns and shocks people. It's funny and difficult to talk about sometimes with faculty. So my late work policy is that there is no penalty for late work. I used to have a caveat, so that like it would be on my discretion, but I just took the caveat away. There's no penalty for late work in my class. However, there are deadlines. And we talk about how the deadlines are important. And they're important because the assignments are scaffolded. You need to do one, and it'll help you understand the next. And the closer you are to the in-class instruction, the easier it's going to be to do. Okay, so with all of that in mind, do your assignments in order. If they're late, you're not going to be penalized by me, but it's going to make it a little bit harder. So that's kind of how we do that. So I get varied reactions, as I alluded to, from other faculty about that. But the fact is, I have failed so many good students just because they were unable to get work in by the due date. And something that I find really distasteful is when, someone gets something in late and they have a really good excuse, and here now I'm in their business and I'm asking what's going on. And, I would rather just have them not have to deal with that discomfort, and I would rather not have to deal with that discomfort. So everybody gets to turn in work after the due date. So what I have found is that the students turn their work in late. You tell them they can turn it in late. Guess what? They turn it in late. But it's often just a little bit late. If they're really serious, they take it seriously. And maybe it'll be a week late, maybe it'll be 2 weeks late. But the fear, when you talk about it, is that everyone's going to wait till the end of the semester and you're going to get this big dump. But that is not what happens. I do get more work to grade at the end of the semester. Some of it is from those students who are trying really hard to get it done, and when they get it in, it's very good. And some of it's from students who would have done that anyway without that policy, right? They would have just done that anyway. There are some students who are just checked out. So let's see, I'm just looking at my notes for some of the other things that I do here. Yeah, so I'm going to stick with this one just for a little bit. I already talked about how sad it is to, give people poor grades when they've done good work, but they just couldn't get it in on time. And it occurred to me that I am grading these students on their ability to meet the deadline and not to understand the work. And is that important to me? And it may be. It is important to some professors, but it's not important to me. But what is important to me is a strong instructor-student relationship. And the more students struggle with getting work in, and then maybe I, take points off or I don't accept it, that's damaging. That's not only damaging my relationship with that student, but it is damaging their level of engagement, right? Students have to be engaged. This is a very personal thing we're teaching. We've discussed that. They have to be engaged, and they can't, they're going to have to be vulnerable, because that's the nature of what we're doing. So if I'm going to expect a student to be engaged and vulnerable, I need to make it a safe space where they feel like they can tell me, this is what I need, and I can say, I'll work with you to the best of my ability. Okay, so let's see what else I've got here. When I create my course map, I create assignments that can be done in class. Some assignments can be done as groups, some as individuals. And when we do an assignment in class, there maybe isn't homework. So sometimes they have homework, sometimes we do stuff together in class. And I try to create assignments that leverage reflective and active learning when I can. I use multiple methods of delivery. I do lecture. Sometimes I combine that with video, or I have a speaker come in. We've had little field trips. Even college students love field trips. I love to get out and about from time to time. In the course that I just designed for NMSU, the online course, one example of how I tried to make that as accessible as possible. And this gives people hives. I'm not asking you to do what I do, but I have found that it works for me. Is all of my quizzes I made so they could take them over and over. And my instruction to the class is, please take this quiz until you get the grade you want, because I want them to engage with the material. And it might be because very often students are very focused on their grade. But if they take that test 3 times, the quiz 3 times, and I've got, information in the wrong answer, right answer, they're not going to be able to help but learn that content, right? And then once they learn that content, that may pull them in and may engage them a little bit more. So what I have found is that with making these tweaks, relatively small changes, students really are less anxious and become more engaged in the learning process, and they have better grades. They get better grades, and I get more little like chocolate bars and things at the end of the semester, which isn't important, but they do appreciate the individualized approach. And you can't have an individualized approach with every student, and I'm certainly not saying that, but just to the the best of your ability, or the best of my ability. So I know I'm running out of time, but I want to talk a little bit about asset-based pedagogy, because I said I was going to. So I have found that that using these inclusive pedagogies for me, and it fits me too, it fits my personality. So I would encourage, if this isn't you, find a way of reaching these students that is you. So for me, it's this positive approach, these inclusive pedagogies. So in this asset strength-based pedagogy, I liked this little almost definition here from an MIT. It was just like a class they had. So asset mindset, seeing all students as having strengths and being capable of learning. So I'm just gonna I already split this quote because it said deficit mindset is, and it was too negative for me. I don't like that negativity, and it's not necessarily a negative approach. The opposite of asset mindset or asset pedagogy. It's different, you know, and it may apply in a different setting than my information literacy class. And it's an approach that has been used a lot. It's historical, and we didn't call it deficit based. Well, how do you teach? Oh, I teach a deficit based, class. So I don't like to use those terms. So, and I'm going to say here, as opposed to focusing on student limitations, but I do think that that's a good way to sort of get your head around what we're talking about when we're talking about these asset-based pedagogies, that we're looking at the student's strengths. And by strengthening a strength, they might, with that stronger strength, be able to strengthen one of their weaknesses. But if we hammer on their weakness, they're going to disengage and they're not going to learn anything because they already know they're not good at that. So this Krutkowski is the last article we're going to look at together. This was the one that it was one of the articles that I actually wrote the review for the ACRL page for, and it really stuck. And this, I looked at this and I thought, this is it. This is the answer I've been looking for. So in this particular article, Krutkowski looked at developing an IL model aligned with a strength-based curriculum. So this is information literacy. This article features information literacy. And the approach that the article took was they were looking at the delivery plan of a strength-based approach to staff in student development. So it's kind of conceptual in that way. It wasn't a case study. So IL should go beyond search and locate. And this was a UK article. So they talked about a group of students as widening participation students. And these are students who come from, disadvantaged backgrounds or, other things, groups that we've talked about already. And Krutkowski recommended looking at these widening participation students as faculty as underachievers rather than low achievers. So they're not lazy. They're coming in, they have barriers, right? So we need to help them crash through their barriers without presenting more. And focusing on process rather than goal is one way to do that. And you can institute a process way of looking at the way that you work with your students, the way that you build your curriculum, the way that you design your course and your policies. That fits. So challenges. I actually thought I popped this slide out because I knew I was going to go over time, but we'll go over it real quick. So for me, the biggest challenges have been when will I have time to fill in the blank? Research inclusive pedagogies, research universal design, update my course map, design new assignments, yada, yada, yada. But what I have found is that does take time, and it is actually an activity that I find enjoyable because it helps me meet the students where they are to the best of my ability, and it helps me ensure that those students are going to engage to the best of their ability. That I'm not throwing up anything that is going to get in the way of a student having, the best experience in that class that they possibly can with what they have going on. So I put lots of work to grade at end of term. I don't get as much as I was afraid I was going to when I instituted these policies, but there is more work at the end of term, but it's so worth it. It really is. It's so great to have, a pile of work or assignments or papers and to go through them, and they're actually quality work. It's work that the student can be proud of and that I can be proud of. So joys outnumber the challenges. I didn't want to say opportunities because I really do feel a lot of joy trying to, crack this nut, right? How do I get students to engage? So struggling students do stay engaged longer. Student instructor relationships are stronger. There was a huge shift in my evaluations at the end of the semester. Huge shift. I mean, they were good before, but they were better after. Students more likely to ask questions when they're feeling out to sea. Students can focus on learning rather than getting a good grade. UDL and inclusive pedagogies reduce anxiety for student and instructor in a lot of ways. The instructor has fewer individual accommodations to keep track of, and struggling students get better grades because they are graded on mastery of content rather than whether or not they can beat a deadline or whether or not they can get, the exact right answer, the exact wrong answer. And again, there are times when they have to get the exact right answer, exact wrong answer, but there are also times that they don't. So I just wanted to leave you with a few tools. I found this wonderful book, Teaching Cross-Cultural Strengths. And so I didn't read an article and say, bam, I love this, changed my class and everything was great. There was a lot of introspection. There's a lot of looking at how I built my course and how I treated students and how I reacted to certain things. So this particular author, or these two authors, provide this really great three simple little tools. Keep a teaching journal. So this will help you identify those implicit reactions and biases you have that may impact your attitudes towards students and pedagogical choices. Record regular insights on culture, different cultures in your class. Observe your behavior. Do you treat all students the same? In the example in the book, she observed one behavior and she decided to observe her behavior of eye contact. And she noticed that there were some students that she kept eye contact with and some she didn't. So she had a place to explore there. Invite someone, a colleague that you trust, to come observe your teaching. So these are just some, I just wanted to leave you with a few tools to get this process started, if that's something you want to do. And that's it. I'm sorry I went over, but hopefully we have some time for some questions.
Thank you, Leslie. That was fantastic. We do have a few questions.
Okay.
The first one, so a lot of faculty get stuck in the rut of this is how we did it when I was in school, or this is how we've always done it. How do we help encourage them to practice these practices as well?
How do we encourage faculty, other faculty?
Yes, who are stuck in that rut of this is how we've always done it.
Well, I have, because I'm somebody obviously who's very vocal and I shoot my mouth off a lot. I have been in situations where I'm with faculty at other disciplines, and I've talked about this and how this is important to me. And I don't get much traction there because there really are differences between disciplines, and I really can't, I really can only think about what I would do for myself. But if I were, and I am in the position right now of being the instructional coordinator, and I would never tell somebody like one of the librarians in my department that say, hey, you need to use this pedagogical approach, or, you need to apply some of these principles of universal design. So what I might do in that case, where I really kind of am invested, I do think this would be a good idea for my department, is I might just be an example, right? I think that's kind of the best I can do, and I don't want to tell anybody, to do this approach because it might not fit them or their courses.
Thank you. And our next question, so regarding the late policy, have you had any students abuse it? I'm thinking about students who never turned anything in. Has that happened?
Yeah, and they fail. And it's funny because they were, so the percentage, I mean, I didn't do any research, but I did keep track of my stats, after I, switched to this model. The percentage of people who just flat out failed because they didn't turn anything in, actually went down. So fewer students did that, but there are still always students that no matter what you do for them are just not going to do the work. Does that answer the question?
Let's see. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any last questions before we wrap up for the day?
I have a question.
Fantastic.
The idea of that giving us 3 opportunities, 3 quizzes. I didn't get the feel for whether you change the quiz a little bit, or do they always have the same wording, the same order of the questions, etc.? Do you change anything about the quiz, the 3 attempts they have?
Well, personally, I don't, and they have unlimited attempts, but it usually doesn't take them more than 3. But these are quizzes like the ones that I used in this course that I just built. I have they're trying to identify primary, secondary, and tertiary sources, or they're telling me which APA citation is correct. So that's the kind of quiz that I'm giving, and it's the same quiz every time. And when I tell them the answer, like if they get the wrong answer, there's a little bit of dialogue saying, no, that's not the right answer in APA. We, the title field is in sentence case or something like that. So not only do they see that they're wrong, they see what's wrong. So then they can go back and I've just taught them, so then they apply that again. And I find that doing that way, they learn the content better. And I wouldn't do that with any really high stakes like final exam or anything like that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? You can unmute or put them in the chat. We've got about another 2 minutes. All right, if no one has any further questions, or if you think of something later, you're always welcome to reach out. Thank you, Leslie, so much for this wonderful presentation. And thank you everyone for joining us. The recording will be available online on the Lilly web page by the end of the day on Friday. So thank you, everyone.
Yeah, and I would like to thank everybody too. And I've given Cassandra permission to distribute my email address if anybody wants to follow up.
Fantastic. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks all.